Good evening and welcome to episode 238 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamandongwa Kumalo. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and as usual, we have a hot property topic that we will be tackling in just a moment. To all our new viewers, welcome to the show. Do make sure that you go to our Facebook or our YouTube page to catch up on all the great content that you have already missed. And to our regular viewers, you know how we do it. Every single weekday at 7 p.m., we have an appointment where we tackle a hot property topic that helps us best navigate our property decisions. And it doesn't matter whether you're a landlord, you're looking to buy, you're looking to sell, or of course, looking to build your own home. This certainly is the property talk show that you want to make sure you're always plugged into. And because we love making the property circle bigger and making sure that we cater to all of your property needs, we've gone a step further, and every single weekday at 8 p.m. there's a whole variety of different shows that you can also tune into. Every Monday and Friday, Chad brings you the Home Shoppers Show, where if you are in the property for if you're in the market rather for a new property, then that is the show that you want to tune into. And if you perhaps you want to daydream a little bit about some of those homes that you can't quite afford yet, then you will be able to get a nice snapshot of what you can look forward to once you've moved up a tax bracket or two. And every Tuesdays and Thursdays, award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko brings you the Farming Podcast, where she's always in conversation with an expert that helps us better understand all things agriculture. So if you've ever wanted to go into agriculture or get a better sense of the agricultural value chain and the different things that you should be mindful of if you want to venture into agri, then that certainly is the show to look for on Tuesdays as well as on Thursdays. And on Wednesdays, Esty Clarkson speaks to you about the First Time Home Buyers Show. She's always in conversation with somebody who's already walked that journey and has gone on to do absolutely phenomenally with their property portfolio. And every Wednesday, she makes sure that she gets those nuggets that can help us, of course, also grow our property portfolios. And if you at home have a great and compelling story about that first property that you bought and how you've gone on to grow your property portfolio, then do let us know, and Esty and the team will reach out to you so we can see if you can't be featured on the show. Well, those are some of the great programs that you can look forward to across our social media platforms here on Private Property. Of course, you can follow us as presenters on our own social media platforms. You can catch me at Zamantungwa_K on Twitter as well as on Instagram. Well, to get us started with our conversation this evening, it's something that if you're living in a community scheme, you absolutely need to know about, because this is one of those things, and I always say you want to attend, you want to make sure that you make the decisions, because whether you like it or not, by virtue of owning in a community scheme, you're already part of the body corporate. And we are this evening looking at everything you need to know about your AGM, so that annual general meeting that you would typically have in your body corporate or certainly in your community scheme. We're going to be looking at that, exploring what happens before an AGM, issues around the proxy, how does the proxy work, and even how does it work when you don't quorate, because there's a legislative framework around how many of you need to be present in order for an AGM to be conducted. So issues of quorum, what happens if you don't meet that quorum, and just also exploring what are some of the standard agenda items that you can expect, especially for those of us who've probably never attended an AGM before of our, various community schemes, so if you want to just get a better sense of what you can expect, then certainly do stay tuned. And of course, how binding some of the decisions that are made at an AGM typically are. I know sometimes, you might think that it's like those decisions that you make at a meeting at work where you agree on something and then 2 weeks later, almost a complete opposite essentially happens. So we're going to also be exploring that. And of course, some common mistakes that sometimes happen when, an AGM is conducted. Because the reality is not all of our managing agents are, on top of how they are managing our respective community schemes. So also understanding if they are doing something wrong during an AGM is so crucial. So if you've got any questions around the AGM for your community scheme, do send them through. We're certainly exploring that this evening. And I want to hear from you at home, how was the first experience, or perhaps even the second experience of attending the AGM of the community scheme where you either live or perhaps one of your rental properties are there? How was that experience like, especially if you had never attended anything like that before? And to help us better unpack and understand how an AGM works, I'm joined this evening by somebody who needs no introduction, Leigh-Anne Harrison, who's the portfolio manager at Pam Golding Property Management Services. Leigh-Anne, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zama. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me this evening. Excited to be here.
It's always such a pleasure to speak with you, Leigh-Anne. When we talk about issues of community scheme living, and I always say this to viewers at home, is that we're always going to explore something that has to do with living in a community scheme, because there are so many different aspects to community scheme living and so many different things that we need to know of and be on top of and understand as owners who have bought into a community scheme. And of course, one of the big ones that happen once a year is that AGM. And unfortunately, so many owners tend to not attend the AGM. And before I even, look at owners not attending, because I tend to run on about how they need to attend and play an active role, let's perhaps, first look at what the objective of an AGM is. Why do we even have an AGM when we live in community schemes?
Thanks, Sama. Thanks for that. I think it's very important that an AGM the purpose of an AGM is that we look at the previous year and what the body corporate or other community scheme has achieved. We approve, the meeting is held to approve certain items, and it's mostly a legislative function. So it's very much ticking a box and then moving on to the new financial year and all the administration and financial management that goes along with that. So I think it very much is a more formal administrative aspect, but still very important for a body corporate so that they can involve all the owners as well.
And before we, take a deep dive into the AGM, how it works, some of the line items that would typically get discussed, let's perhaps explore what happens before the AGM. And because I know there's certain things that would happen prior to the AGM. There's certain communication that gets sent to us as owners. So take us through what we can expect in terms of what happens prior to the AGM taking place.
Okay, so generally with any body corporate, and I'm referring to body corporates, but when it comes to homeowners associations, you always refer to your constitution. So when it comes to any quorum requirements, notice requirements, and the like. So usually what would happen is, if I think of myself and my situation, I'd be dealing with the trustees, and we've received all the documents we need to set an AGM, and we decide, okay, we're going to set it for X date. The first thing to look at is the notice period. So we can't just set a date for tomorrow or a week's time. In most instances, if there are no special business items, it's 14 days notice. And it requires certain documents to have finalized before we can send the pack out. And most notably is the budget, as well as the audited financial statements. So once we have all these documents in place, and the trustees and chairperson agree on an AGM date, we then set the date, and then with 14 days notice, we send the pack out to all the owners of the scheme. Once that's 14-day period, once we get to the end of it, what I like to do is send a reminder to owners 7 days before, and then 48 hours before, and even on the day, because it is important, or it is a problem where we don't get a quorum. And generally, I find in most schemes, owners are quite apathetic. They aren't really interested unless it affects them afterwards, where a decision has been taken. So I like to send reminders just so that it kind of prompts owners to maybe look at the pack another, as opposed to filing it in their email inbox. And prior to the meeting, also to ensure a quorum, we look at the proxies. So in a pack, a proxy form is attached, which is where you can appoint someone to represent you. And, if you can't attend the meeting, but you'd like some points raised, or we encourage owners to ensure we have a quorum, at least appoint your neighbor as your proxy, or appoint somebody to be your proxy, so we can at least ensure a quorum. Or if you want, or if there are decisions being taken and you can't attend, but you'd like your point of view raised, you appoint a proxy who can then raise them on your behalf. And then prior to the meeting, the managing agent's role is to make sure the proxies are in line with what's required, and they ensure that they're added to the quorum when the time comes.
And that's such an important one, Leigh-Anne, and it actually flows very nicely with the quorum needs, because one of the pressure points that I've found, I don't think I've ever been in a AGM where we've curated. Think of all the years when I've owned, I think even in the era of COVID, when we're doing it virtually, I think the last one we nearly curated, if my memory serves me correct. We ended up not curating, and it ended up needing to be moved. Perhaps take us through, what happens in the event where we don't curate, because it does become an issue even in terms of how long we wait to essentially count whether we've curated or not, and what decision gets taken at that particular point.
So, like I mentioned on the reminders, what I did was, I'll give an example of a body corporate that started managing last year. So every year they never had a quorum, and they would always adjourn for the following week. And this specific year that I took the body corporate over, I said, let's just see how I can fix this. And I sent reminders. And what I did was, it was a smaller body corporate. I made my PA just phone or give courtesy calls to certain owners. And for the first time in, I think, 5 years, we got a quorum. So I think it's important where there's a body corporate that that sometimes you won't get a quorum. Try your best. Let the managing agent do a bit of work on the side just to ensure that, because it is a time waster to have to come back the following week. So always, I like to keep that in mind, just as a little tip. So what happens is, if after 30 minutes at a meeting you haven't got a quorum, the quorum requirement for body corporate is 33.3% of your total members. If you don't have that 33%, the meeting cannot take place, and you'd have to re-adjourn, same time, same venue, the following week. No notice is required to the owners for the following week's adjourned meeting. But as a courtesy, I'd just like to then inform all members the following morning, the meeting has been adjourned, here is the pack, and we'll see you hopefully next week for the AGM, re-adjourned AGM. So just going back to adjourned meetings, once you get to your adjourned meeting, there's no requirement for a quorum. You can then just start the meeting on the dot at 7 o'clock, as per the agenda.
And I am, of course, this evening in conversation with Leigh-Anne Harrison. I see she's actually changed organizations. She's actually a portfolio manager at Rabie Property Administrators this evening. We're looking at everything you need to know about your AGM. Do send your questions and comments at home. If you're part of a community scheme and perhaps there's still certain things you do not understand about the annual general meeting that is obviously held once a year. Sometimes we also have a special a meeting, a special AGM, and we'll see if we can get to some of the issues that sometimes get raised in that, in one of the properties where I own, we're about to have a special AGM, a very special meeting. We've already had the AGM. Unfortunately, certain matters have arisen, and there's now a need for a separate meeting altogether. But before we get to that, now that we understand the reason behind it, understand issues of proxy and even co-rating, Leigh-Anne, let's perhaps now explore, the standard agenda items in an AGM, because one of the things that, I picked up certainly in the earlier years of attending AGMs was that the order of proceedings is relatively similar in almost all AGMs. The line items are relatively similar in most of them. And the first few times you attend, you don't know these things. And, by then I would usually, prep as much as possible, read everything, and try to be on top of all the administrative, the pack that, of course, the managing agent would have sent us. Give us a sense of what some of these standard agenda items can we expect when we attend the AGM.
Sure. So what's important to note is the items that are standard items are legislated. So the items that are placed on the agenda can't be removed. The items I'm going to refer to. So if ever somebody is unsure of the AGM agenda and the standard items, they can refer to the sectional title legislation, and they can note what items should be on the agenda. The first item, generally the approval of the previous year's minutes. They get distributed after an AGM, but they are only approved at the following AGM. And what I usually find is that owners will have a comment or two as to something that was said in the minutes. And what I want to note is that minutes aren't verbatim what XYZ said that she would approach so-and-so in terms of a leak between the units, for instance. It's just the minutes reflect any decisions taken and what was highlighted. So sometimes we get a lot of back and forth from owners where they want to approve the minutes because their comment on ABC's lawn wasn't noted. So it's always important to note that minutes aren't verbatim what is said. It's just highlighting what was discussed and the decisions taken. The next item is to discuss the insurance for the body corporate, and there's usually various items underneath that point, but it does affect you as a homeowner, as a section owner, because it refers to your replacement value of your unit. So it is something that usually they walk through the item, but it's important to look at that to see what your unit's replacement value is, and if you have an objection, to note that with the managing agent so you can get that taken care of. And that is why it's important that the notice goes out 14 days before the time, so owners have enough time to work through the pack, ask questions, get them answered before the meeting starts, such that when the AGM starts, we can work through these prescribed agenda items, and the meeting can then be called to close. The next item, which is probably the most important, the financial aspects. It's where the budget for the new financial year is approved, and the audited financial statements. What I do find that sometimes, because of the time frame you have to hold your AGM, you don't always get your financial statements approved in time. Sometimes the managing agent will slot in draft financial statements into the AGM pack. The Act does stipulate that they have to be final financial statements, meaning they must be signed off by the trustees. It's not, it doesn't mean that the AGM will be declared null and void if that is not the case. But I think when you get a pack that shows draft financial statements, you need to ask the question, why are they drafts and not final statements? And then the next item is the appointment of trustees. When the pack is sent out, nomination forms are sent along with the pack, requesting nominations for trustees. However, if they are none received, they can be taken from the floor at this agenda item. So you'll ask the owners how many trustees you want for the new year, and thereafter you will then, if you have received nominations prior, you will advise the whole body, or you can take from the floor if somebody wants to nominate themselves or nominate someone else that is present at the meeting. You'll then vote, and your trustees will have been appointed for the new year after the AGM, and they will serve until the AGM for the next year. Next is some special business. So before meeting, the agenda or the managing agent will ask owners if they would like to add any items to the agenda, and this is where you get an opportunity then to discuss those agenda items. It's not I call it a free-for-all, where owners generally think or would like to raise every single item that they wanted raised throughout the year at the AGM, because then we're going to be sitting at a 3 to 4 hour AGM. It's important to note it must be sort of common issues that the whole body corporate can look into, and then they'll also discuss your special resolutions if you have special resolutions that are added to the agenda. Usually what happens let's say we decide we want to install water meters, and we're encouraged to call a special general meeting. However, our AGM is coming up, so what I recommend is that they align both together. Have an AGM, and they include a special resolution for whatever they'd like to pass. When it comes to passing a special resolution, a 3-day notice period must be given, so that must also be taken into account. If you want to have an AGM with special business, then your documents must be ready even earlier than normal, because you're giving a 30-day notice period to owners of the meeting or the special business.
We are of course taking your questions and comments at home as we look at everything you need to know about your annual general meeting. Of course, this is for owners who live or have certainly bought in a community scheme. And I am this evening in conversation with Leigh-Anne Harrison, who is a portfolio manager at Rabie Property Administrators. We've got a question coming through from Facebook. Opa Matthews asking if there was never an AGM for over a year without any communication from the body corporate, can owners request it, and what should be the process?
There is a section in the STSMA, the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, where owners can then call a meeting. You'll just need 25% of the entire owner. What's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. You'll need 25% of the owners to agree to that. And usually how I would go about it is just by getting them to sign a petition, or if you have the email addresses, email them, and then that 25% you send to the managing agent, and they then have 14 days to call a meeting.
More of your questions and comments. I see one of our regular guests has asked on Facebook. Zelinda van der Merwe has asked, any tips for AGMs that are being held via remote attendance like Zoom, particularly when it comes to issues of voting?
Thanks for that. It's a very good question, and it's very applicable, during this, especially this last year. So Zoom, if you have your meeting on Zoom, there is a polling function where you can ask the question and it will pop up, and then people can click yes, no, and abstain. The problem I have with that is that it doesn't give you live results in terms of your PQ requirements. So it's not a one person, one vote situation. It's based on your PQ. So when you vote via the poll function, you won't also see who's voted what, yes or no, and then you can't determine their PQ vote. So you won't be able to record the results live. So there's a new company called MeetingPal, and what they've done is introduced an app you can have on your phone, and while everyone's on the meeting, they have the app open on their phone to vote. So preloaded, you preload all the agenda items. And while the meeting is taking place, let's say we vote on approval of the budget. Everyone has their phones open. They click approval of the budget, yes, and the results come up almost automatically. The company or the person that I've dealt with, Punala Roo, is amazing. He helps just get the meeting set up. He's online to help with any questions during the meeting. And from my experience and a lot of my colleagues, it's been a really seamless process. So it's something to take into consideration when you're wanting to have a meeting. And maybe this is the reason why you haven't had your AGM, because you're concerned on how you're going to hold the meeting, how will voting take place. So I think MeetingPal is definitely something to take into consideration. Also with Celinda, she helps chair meetings, helps with your virtual meetings. She helps, gives guidance to owners if they have any questions. So also someone that they can contact, TVDM consultants, who can help you with your AGM queries, whether you're a managing agent or an owner.
Mm-hmm. And the name of the gentleman who actually came up with Meeting Pal escapes me now, because I know we've actually had him on the show before. What's his name again, Leigh-Anne?
Puna LaRue. P-O-E-N-A. Yeah, Puna.
We've spoke about it on the show. We've had him on the show.
Great.
Reference to it, and of course, I think one of the big things, of course, Leigh-Anne, that sometimes tends to come up when it comes to AGMs, especially I'll say in the if owners are attending it maybe for the first time or the second time, or as we know in community schemes, ownership changes, is understanding how binding decisions that get made in an AGM are, because obviously there are certain decisions that get voted on and matters that get concluded, because not every matter will be decided, for example, by the trustees who would have been elected during the course of them being trustees that year, but certain decisions do get raised at an AGM and are concluded at an AGM. Perhaps shed some light on how binding those decisions are, because I've found instances where oftentimes the owners that don't attend, AGMs, decisions are made at AGMs, and then they effectively complain, say, why would something like that be done? It affects them. They own in a particular, community scheme. So perhaps shed light on how binding some of these things are, just so our viewers get a sense of also the importance then of attending these meetings and having a say at an AGM.
Thanks, Sama. It's such a good question, because up until today I was dealing with a specific owner who is upset about a decision that has been taken. If all that for an AGM to be valid and binding, it has to have a quorum. If you have a quorum, you can pass resolutions. If your notice period has been sufficient, 14 days, and for special business 30 days, and you have your quorum and you pass a resolution, it is binding on all owners of that body corporate. I'll give this example. It was a body corporate where they decided they wanted to rent out their common property bays that they owned. The body corporate had purchased some bays via liquidation, and they owned 5 bays. They then took a resolution at the meeting to rent those bays out, and the resolution was passed. I then told all the owners about it, and the owner questioned, I don't agree with this. It surely isn't binding. So I said, unfortunately, sir, we gave the requisite notice in terms of the legislation. We passed the resolution at the meeting with 75%. Thus, the resolution is binding. So we get this question a lot, and it is important that owners read their meeting packs and attend the meetings so they can say yes or no, or at least ask further questions on the resolution before it gets passed.
And I think, Leigh-Anne, before we round up, I want to get a sense from you about, and you've already touched on some of these, but what are some of the common mistakes that sometimes happen at AGMs? Especially, we've now seen there are more and more managing agents that have, popped up, and some of them are, I want to say, they are a one-man show, and not all of them necessarily, have a full understanding or scope of how to best manage a community scheme. But of course, people are entrepreneurial, so they start their ventures. So for viewers at home who may find themselves perhaps having employed such a managing agent, what are some of the mistakes should we be careful of, particularly coming from, the managing agent, or even, let me say, the trustees? Because sometimes you may find that the trustees are, I want to say, working in collaboration with the managing agent in how an AGM is, conducted, to the point where some of the wrong things that are being done are sort of spearheaded by the trustees. So what are some of those common mistakes should we be careful of in terms of, how the AGM is communicated or even run during the actual process?
Thanks, Sama. So one thing that's also very important is When you're wanting to pass a resolution at a meeting, at an annual general meeting, it's important that the agenda says so in no uncertain terms. I went to an AGM where they wanted to pass a resolution on water meters, but the resolution it just said special resolution. It didn't even say resolution. It said water meters. And then at the meeting they wanted to pass a resolution, and I objected because the Act says that you have to be specific in what you want to pass, the reasons for it. You have to attach the necessary documentation. But it's important when you're wanting to pass a resolution that the agenda is correct in that instance, and the Act does specify there are list requirements. It's important that the managing agent and the trustees are aware how they actually note the special resolution on the agenda. Another item is the lateness of an AGM. The Act states that you have to have it within 4 months of your year end. So if your year end is Feb, you must have it by June. And a lot of the times we get that wrong, maybe because there's an issue with the financials being late, or there usually are many reasons. But it's important that trustees trustees know that they need to, if they are late with an AGM, they're in contravention of the Act. So it's important that you stick to the deadline given by the prescribed legislation. Another item, notice periods. If you aren't sure about a notice period, I always say add an extra day, just in case, because that could, if you are wanting to pass a special resolution and you don't give the required notice, the entire integrity of the meeting then fails. That resolution can't be passed. If it does get passed, it may be called into question thereafter. So always check what notice period is that you require, and if you are uncertain, add an extra day just for good measure. Adjourned meetings. Sometimes what happens is if they have the adjourned meeting and they move it to a different time or a different date, the Act specifically says 7 days, so it's important to stick to that, especially if owners that could not make the first meeting and they now know it's an adjourned meeting, they will attend within those 7 days. So it's important to stick to the time period that's prescribed. Another not common mistake is the chairing of the meeting. A lot of the times people believe that, well, the chairman of the trustees should chair the meeting. And in my experience, I actually enjoy chairing AGMs because, it's the same agenda every time. I know, what to say, what to ask, what questions to answer from the owners, how to kind of let the meeting run smoothly. So it's not always the chairman that has to chair the meeting. You can have the managing agent chair the meeting as well.
And I've actually found I prefer it when the managing agent, chairs the meeting. It doesn't seem as though the we'll call it the outgoing, trustee is pushing their own agenda, because more often than not, you find that same outgoing chair is going to stand for re-election again, and very likely going to stand to be chair again. So I kind of like the separation slightly, especially during an AGM. Well, Leigh-Anne, we are going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Summer. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to future videos.
And that is Leigh-Anne Harrison, who is a portfolio manager at Rabie Property Administrators. And that is all from us this evening on the Private Property Podcast, from myself, Zamantungwa Khumalo, and the rest of the team. We're back again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Until then, at 8 p.m., Umbali Nogo brings you this evening's episode of the Farming Podcast. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Nobuntu Webster. I'm an entrepreneur. I moved to Sandton to pursue a dream. I've based myself in Sandton because it's the gateway to Africa. The neighborhood of Sandton is alive. It's alive with possibility. It's got the most amazing vibe. If you need to get anything done, this is the place to get it done. One of the things I really love about Sandton is how it lights up at night. If those lights don't inspire you, nothing will. Sandton is the richest square mile in Africa. It has everything, from shopping in Sandton City to five-star hotels like a Michelangelo for my international guests. It works for me to be here. There are so many designer stores. There's an abundance of clothes and everything else to choose from. Being an entrepreneur, I travel a lot, so it's really convenient to be able to get onto the Gau train, and in 15 minutes, I'm at the airport. Business is important to me, but my family is everything, and that's why my family and I are looking to move into one of the suburbs in Sandton. Sandton has some of the most exclusive homes in the country, in places like Hyde Park and Sandown. A little bit less fast-paced is your suburbs like Bryanston and Rivonia. Bryanston was a natural choice. It's got great open spaces, it's safe. My son's already at a really good school there. Sandton gives me great variety, from an awesome nightlife to beautiful places for lunch to spas where I can really relax and recharge. Things happen in Sandton, and that's my neighborhood.